introduction. What we thought we would do is, since we're tag team, we're giving this as a joint presentation, we would just start by introducing ourselves just a little bit. Part of the work of developing networks depends on attracting and telling people our stories about why we're involved in doing this work and what it means to us. So we thought we'd actually start by just sharing a little bit about that. So I came to this work and became aware of the importance of health system design when I finished my residency and entered the U.S. Public Health Service, the National Health Service Corps. I was placed in Rochester, New York, where I found myself working two part-time positions, one in a community health center and the other in a private pediatric practice. On the same day, I would often find myself caring for very similar patients in two very different settings. And I realized that the impact that I could achieve really depended a lot on the system in which I was working. And I was later transferred to South Central Los Angeles, where I was working with undocumented immigrants in the U.S. From Mexico, and I really came to see the limits of my capabilities as a physician, so that drove me to go back to graduate school to study clinical epidemiology and become involved in making health systems better. So, I'll let you introduce yourself.
So I'm Jenny. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 12 years old and have spent a lot of my life in the past 13 years doing advocacy work and trying to get the patient voice out there. As I was in university preparing to go to graduate school, I was looking for research mentors and actually found the Improve Care Now network through research stalking, which people laugh at, but was a very serious endeavor trying to find a research mentor that fit my interests. Through that, I stumbled upon the Improve Care Now network and have been involved with the Patient Advisory Council for several years.
Great. So what we thought we would do this morning is let me just give a little bit of an overview of the work that we're doing. Jenny will talk about the components of the system that have to do with how we think about engagement. And then we thought we'd start a conversation between the two of us and invite everybody else into it about some of the topics that we actually spend a lot of time talking about. So instead of making you stand here, why don't you take a seat, and then we'll just take turns here. So before I begin, I also want to acknowledge there's a very large team of people at a number of sites around the country who participate in the Improve Care Now network, which is the focus, which has been the focus of the Collaborative Chronic Care Network project. So I'll talk about what a network is, what some of our design principles have been, and how the network, how we believe the network achieves its impact, and we'll close with some reflections on what we've learned and what's still challenging. But I want to start by talking about the perspective that's driving the design of our work, and that is the needs and goals of the participants in health. So we all know that the system for chronic illness care isn't working. It's not working for Jessica. She's 11. She's got Crohn's disease. She's in a lot of pain. She's facing problems like risk of stunted growth, possible arthritis, surgery, but those actually are not the least of her problems. She can't go anywhere without thinking about where the bathrooms are, and many normal childhood activities like sleepovers can be very challenging. The system is also not working for Jessica's doctor. We call her Dr. Sandy Rohn. She has a variety of treatment options available, but the best evidence, the evidence that comes from clinical trials, can't provide the information that she needs to individualize care at the level of a particular patient. The system is also not working for Jessica's mom, Anna. Because the care system doesn't really facilitate her participation, she's wondering about trying dietary modifications to see how best to control her daughter's symptoms. And she keeps an eye on what's going on, but she feels it's the doctor's role to come up with solutions, and she doesn't really imagine the collaborative possibilities. And finally, it's not working for Dr. Vincent Kapoor. He's a young gastroenterology researcher faced with the problem of having small, unrepresentative data sets and a lack of easy and productive ways to share data and to increase the impact and scope of his research. So the predominant organization of healthcare systems today relies on management approaches that were developed in the industrial age, and this model has failed to produce satisfactory outcomes and can't respond effectively and isn't responding effectively to the rapidly evolving growth in knowledge and changing dynamics of healthcare financing. So the Institute of Medicine in 2007 created the concept of the learning healthcare system, and this provides an exciting vision of how healthcare might be organized, in which patients and providers work together to choose care based on the best evidence, to drive discovery as a natural outgrowth of patient care, and ensure quality, safety, and value, all pretty much in real time. But a key problem is how to design and operationalize these systems. The concept is that healthcare and services and generating new knowledge should involve connecting all the actors, the patients, the clinicians, the researchers, and their organizations, and to do so in a way that meets their needs so that the activities are integrated and so everyone is motivated to participate. And in pediatrics, of course, the problem is magnified because even large centers like Cincinnati Children's don't have enough patients to measure and improve care without collaborating together. So when we think of a learning health system, we often think of what happens in an individual institution, but in pediatrics, our focus is often in a multi-institutional setting. So with funding from the NIH Transformative Research Program, my colleague and I, Michael Sade, wondered what if we could create a vastly better chronic care system by harnessing the inherent motivation and collective intelligence of patients and clinicians? And what if the system allowed patients and physicians to share information, to collaborate and solve problems, and use their collective creativity and expertise to act in ways that could improve health? Yochai Benkler is a professor at Harvard Law School, and he writes that it's not intuitive that thousands of volunteers could beat big companies, but they do. And as we all know, Wikipedia, an open source tool, put Microsoft and Carta out of business. And hotel chains like Sheraton are concerned about Airbnb because of the willingness of people to open their homes to complete strangers to provide lodging. So these organizations stand in a profound contrast to systems that are based on traditional forms of managerial control. And in our work, we've taken a similar organizational approach to create what's known as a network-based production system in healthcare. Network-based production is a means by which the production of knowledge and know-how and information is distributed over large groups of people in a self-selected, decentralized way. It's been an evolutionary advantage for humans to work together and cooperate in groups and form communities. And it's because of the advent of the internet that this same possibility has become possible in many other forms of work. So the benefits of sharing are not limited to business. In the Human Genome Project, the open scientific approaches in which investigators shared the work and results of their work resulted in sequencing the human genome years in advance of what was anticipated. And we believe that this kind of method for knowledge production was particularly suited to healthcare because it's a large, complex system, and the tools and knowledge and skills are widely distributed and don't reside in and can't reside in any one person, place, or organization. So that drove the thinking behind our work. And the scientific basis for this work really comes from a variety of fields, including law, economics, sociology, population biology, and business. During the 1970s, scholars in economics and political science and sociology recognized what they called co-production in public services, such as police and fire protection, sanitation, and education. So we as citizens co-produce public good when we take our garbage to the street, or when we participate in parent-teacher associations and make contributions to our schools. And there's a diverse body of literature that demonstrates that it's possible to design systems that build on people's generosity and cooperation. More recent work in business has expanded this typology of organizational architecture of value creation to how to use network configurations to produce value. So today there are networks and in healthcare there are networks of patients and clinicians and researchers. They just don't interact very much. And so we wondered how we could bring them together. So let me just show you the example that motivated our work and how this is taking place today. And I'll be talking about the Improve Care Now network, which is a network of now 89 gastroenterology centers, pediatric gastroenterology centers in the U.S., the U.K., and elsewhere. It came together initially as a group of pediatric gastroenterologists who wanted to continuously improve the care and outcomes of kids with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And so these are the data from network care centers that have been in the network long enough to have more than 75% of their patients enrolled in our registry. And as you can see, the percentage of patients in remission has risen from about 60% when we started in 2007 to just over 80% today. And this is in the context of no new medications for the disease in the last 10 years. It's how did they do it? They did this by sharing knowledge, know-how, sharing the work. Every center has pooled their data, compared their outcomes, standardized their care, and learned from one another about how to get better. This is a model that we've been using at Cincinnati Children's and are starting to apply in a variety of other diseases that are shown here. The upper left is a network called Solutions for Patient Safety. It's a network of hospitals working on patient safety, and the graph shows a 50% reduction in serious safety offense over the 110 hospitals. The graph on the upper right shows the Ohio Perinatal Quality Collaborative. These are data from every birth hospital. It's about 120 hospitals in Ohio. Shows a reduction in elective preterm delivery. This is inducing mothers who are not yet at term to to go into labor. It's not recommended by but often done for the convenience of the obstetrician or the mother. And with using these same sort of collaborative methods, we've been able to reduce by about 75% the number of preterm births in the state of Ohio. The bottom graph shows the hypoplastic left heart syndrome network. It shows a 40% reduction in mortality for the 55 care centers. This is 95% of all kids in the country who have this condition this is data from the first year of life. So the method works. It's resulting in very large amounts of savings, and we're increasingly convinced that this is a model that is reproducible. So let me turn to how we do this to give you a little bit more of a detailed glance at the approach. So creating conditions for a collaborative chronic care network involves increasing and aligning individual and group motivation. This takes place through a focus on a common outcome and a sense of shared purpose, specific efforts to build community and a culture of sharing, effective use of data to decrease the time and effort and money required to participate, and by using a variety of scientific approaches to learn in complex systems. The way we think about information flow is illustrated on this slide. So the concept is that patients and clinicians interact at a point of care. Increasingly, this could be virtual. We produce data through our interactions, our clinical interactions, through electronic health records or patient-reported outcomes or even biospecimens. Those data go into a registry and are fed back into the system and are used to standardize care and reduce variability in care, which allows us to measure patient outcomes. Using the data on outcomes, we're able to identify gaps in care and then bring patients and clinicians together to identify management practices that could be improved. That drives our comparative effectiveness research and produces new knowledge which can go back into the system. And I use this illustration as a method of sort of signposting what I'll be talking about. So I want to just briefly talk about the technology that we're using because it's an important part of reducing some of the friction and transactional costs of improving healthcare systems. So with funding from the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research, my colleague Keith Marsolo led the development of what we call a data-in-once system. Traditionally, when we capture data for research or quality improvement, we see the patient, we abstract the data onto a case report form, and then enter that into a registry. Working with electronic health record vendors, we've been able to embed the data that's used for the Improve Care Now registry into electronic forms that physicians use when they see patients. This is a screenshot of a Epic smart form. So this takes about 2 minutes for physicians to capture the discrete data when they see patients. That's uploaded into what we call an enhanced registry that we use for a variety of purposes to support clinical care, to support QI and research. We're able to produce automated reports for physicians in the network throughout at all 89 care centers that facilitate pre-visit planning and population management. The data about performance are transparent, so every site can see the performance of every other site, and the data are refreshed on a daily basis. There are data quality reports, and this has led to improvements in data quality to near research-grade data quality, and then we're able to use the data for research to do observational and comparative effectiveness research, to do clinical trials, N-of-1 studies. We also use the data to manage the consent process to identify who's consented for which kinds of projects. Let me talk now about engagement. So at the beginning of the research, in our design process, we used ethnographic and qualitative methods to understand the participants in the community, the patients, the clinicians, the researchers, and their needs and goals. The research identified people. This is actually Bianca Simmons, not a real person. She's what designers call a persona. She represents attributes of groups of people within the community. And so we identified a subgroup of people represented by Bianca. Bianca is motivated by a desire to keep her symptoms at bay, but Bianca also has had important experiences learning from other patients about how to live with a chronic illness, and she finds purpose in being a leader in the community and giving back. And so we developed a design focused on enabling people like Bianca to fulfill their goals and needs. And we imagined that we might be able to build tools and supports that would enable people like Bianca to play a significant role, one of generosity and contribution. We also imagined that many members of our community, including clinicians and care teams and researchers, would also begin to contribute and give back. So I'm going to let Jenny talk about the ways in which we've been working to do this. So.
Thank you, Peter. All right, so thinking about engagement, what does this mean, and what does this mean for patients? So as Peter was talking about, we're part of this very large learning healthcare system so that we can produce knowledge, information, and the ability to actually know how to do these things, both with our patients now, but also in the future, and ultimately to improve personal health and the system at large. Includes, of course, everyone, since everyone has a unique role to play. There's different states of engagement. So we have awareness, participation, contribution, and ownership. So I'll use myself as an example to help make this a little clear. So when I was 12 and newly diagnosed with Crohn's, I was the last person to think that I would ever be standing up here today. I was in deep denial, didn't really think I had the illness, didn't understand what it was and what it really meant for my future. That said, I was aware. I was aware of the illness. I was aware that there were organizations that I could be a part of. Participation was the next logical step and is the next logical step within the stages of engagement, where I would go to fundraisers and do things that were perhaps the day of or attend a patient knowledge seminar, but nothing that was really engaging myself that I felt there was a lot of ownership in. Contribution, so within the Improve Care Now network, we have a patient advisory council. When I joined the Patient Advisory Council, I was contributing to the larger PAC for Patient Advisory Council and to Improve Care Now. But I wasn't really owning anything. I was working on projects that were led by other kinds of researchers. Then I came to ownership, and we'll talk about that in terms of an actual project in just a minute. But that's really when I took charge of different projects that I felt like I wasn't just a part of the network, but I was part of the leadership of the network. So again, going through this, in the awareness, you're aware of that Improve Care Now exists, so this is also for patients that are within the system, and they might understand that they have a role to play, but aren't sure what that exact role is and don't play that role as of yet. In the participation phase, individuals with an ICN sign the consent, so they're part of the registry that Peter was talking about. Our blog is called Loop, so they might be reading different Loop blog posts, and they might join the exchange that Peter will talk about in a minute. That's a commons for sharing. In the contribution phase, they might join a quality improvement team, become a mentor, join a different work group, be it the parent working group with the PAC, and post things to the actual blog of Loop. And again, in leadership, they might be leading teams, organizing events, training other mentors, running QI projects, and creating tools. So I'm going to talk about a tool that the PAC and myself developed. And just as a quick thing to not gloss over this, so you can see that the percentage lessens dramatically as we go across the screen. The idea being that we can have 100% awareness in terms of the patients in the network, but only 1% are actually leading, which makes sense when you think about a lot of different organizations. At the same time, we only have 1% of patients, in this example, who are represented in the ownership model. And so we're trying to move people from awareness all the way over to ownership. Okay, so this is the model of the Patient Advisory Council. When I first started with the Patient Advisory Council, in many ways we were not a figurehead council, but we were a national council. We had a Facebook group, and that was great, but there wasn't a great sense of contribution and ownership. So we didn't really do much beyond consulting on research projects, but we didn't have our own projects or things that we were contributing ourselves. So what Sammy Kennedy, my former co-chair of the PAC, and I did was we decided to restructure the PAC. We thought it was very important that the PAC mimicked the structure of Improve Care Now so that there was both a sense of leadership and we were chronically fostering sustainability so that it wasn't just a matter of Sammy and I leading now, but in the future that there would be more patient leaders. So what we decided to do was we created these 3 different task forces. So you can see the co-chairs at the center. We have an advocacy task force, a communication task force, and a recruitment task force. This way, there's a variety of leadership roles people can play depending on, be it illness or education. They can have a higher leadership role, being the chair of one of these task forces, or just be on one of the task forces so that it's flexible. And so you can see up there now the rating on the right-hand side. So Alex and Bianca are our current co-chairs who are wonderful, but it's nice to have passed the torch along. but I wanted to give you a sense of the model of the PAC, that we've moved away from a hierarchy of just having co-chairs and everyone else below, but that there's really a system so that we can grow leaders within the PAC and within the network. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the Osby Toolkit for a few minutes. So as it's about 6 years almost, which is unbelievable, that I've had a permanent ileostomy. And at one of the first community conferences that we have within the Improve Care Now network, Sammy and I, so the former PAC co-chair, and I were asked to come up with a song that represented our journey with IBD, which is really, really hard if you think about it. If you had to think of a song that represented everything, it's a little difficult. So Sammy picked a great kind of get up and fight 'em kind of song. My song was a little bit different. My song was Taylor Swift's "We're Never Ever Getting Back Together" as an ode to my long-lost colon. And after that, a lot of people came up to me within the network who didn't know me that well and said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you had an ostomy, I couldn't tell." And to me, this is a bit of a backhanded compliment in the sense of it's nice that you can't tell you have an ostomy. At the same time, you don't need to. You don't, be it that you have an insulin pump, an ostomy. It doesn't have to be a big part of your life. It doesn't have to be a visible thing. But after that, a lot of providers in the network, both doctors, bless you, and nurses would ask if I would mentor patients within the network who were considering or had newly had ostomy surgery. And I've been a trained ostomy mentor, but at the same time, I was only reaching the people that the providers were recruiting or were sending my way. And if those patients didn't really want to keep up a relationship or weren't very interested in talking about ostomies, that relationship ended pretty quickly. But we're, again, kind of thinking about that 1% ownership. We had very few patients who were actually benefiting from the mentorship. And on average, ostomates tend to be a little bit older. There aren't as many young ostomate mentors. It's really hard to talk about these things. And when you have a 40-year-old ostomate mentor talking with a young patient facing ostomy surgery, there are different developmental phases. It's not the greatest fit. And this really bothered me. This didn't seem like it was very fair, and it didn't seem like it fit with the accessibility. That's really the spirit of Improve Care Now. So going off of that, the PAC developed a task force to create the Ostomy Toolkit. The idea being, let's create a resource that mimics the mentorship model. So, for example, there's question and answer. So things like, how do I tell my friends? And then we have different people who have quoted responses to that to make it feel like it's coming from patients and not from providers. The entire toolkit project was led by the PAC, which is not at all to say that providers in the network at large weren't incredibly supportive of it, but it was an idea that we conceived and we carried out. So everything from organizing the meetings to writing to editing to formatting was something that I led on the PAC. The other thing that we did, you'll see the data in just a moment, it was fine for us to develop this in and of the PAC, and we were very proud of it. But we didn't want to stop there, because that's not what ICN stands for, ICN being Improve Care Now. We really wanted to aspire to the quality improvement model and understand what this meant for patients from the clinician's perspective. So we sent out a survey to all the clinicians in the network to understand if they liked the tool, what was good about the tool, but also to understand the barriers and how ready the different centers felt to actually have these kinds of conversations with patients to see how usable this tool may be. So this is some of the data up here. This was recently presented at a pediatric psych conference in Atlanta. So you can see in the pie chart, this is the clinician's perspective on their ability to prepare young individuals to have surgery. What's really interesting about this, there's one color that's missing because nobody endorsed it. That color would be quite well. So we had from somewhat poorly to we had from quite poorly to quite well, but no one endorsed quite well. About a third of the clinicians endorsed unsure, which is very telling in my book. But you can see here that there's a big mix of how people feel that they're able to prepare people for ostomy surgery, and again, that no one endorsed the quite well. The bar graph, we can see these are the different barriers that clinicians endorsed. What's important is that everyone endorsed all of these barriers at 50% or greater. So the biggest barriers being the lack of medical resources, the lack of social resources, which was the highest, the surgical time pressure, so it could be later that week, later that day, these decisions can be made very quickly, and familial resistance to talking about these issues. I wanted to address quickly, in the Osby Toolkit, we do our best to address these barriers. So we certainly cover medical resources and social resources within the toolkit. What's nice about the toolkit in regards to the surgical time pressure is that it's a physical toolkit that you can write on, you can take home. There's a note section at the very end. The idea being we might alleviate some of that pressure so that people can be educated both in the perioperative time, but also afterward when they're home. You might have questions about college 2 years after your ostomy surgery, and you have the toolkit to go back to. So we try to address that time pressure. With the familial resistance, the entire toolkit is written at a 5th grade literacy level so that it's most accessible to patients in the network. It's not necessarily designed for adolescents. That said, the format was made so that it can be used really from 8-9 years all the way up. So again, trying to break down those barriers and make it really accessible to talk about. It's designed as a tool for patients, not for parents. That said, it can certainly be a great talking point to have these families better engage in these kinds of conversations. I'll hand it back to Peter.
So the one thing that I just want to stress about what Jenny just talked about, nobody asked the PAC to develop the ostomy toolkit. They decided that this was something that was important for them to do. And as contributions started to emerge, we realized in the network that we needed to be able to share them and have a place that was easily accessible. So another group of volunteers came up with the idea of creating a Pinterest-like website that we call the Improve Care Now Exchange, where teams can post, anybody in the network, patients, clinicians, researchers can post materials. Patients post videos, clinicians post guidelines, letters, care centers post letters that they use to send to their patients to inform them about the network. So this becomes a repository that on any given day, 400 or 500 people in the network are using, posting, just like we use Pinterest for planning weddings or events. This is a picture of me with the volunteers. These are folks actually from Cincinnati Children's who took time away from their day job to actually code the site. One is a programmer, one is our medical librarian, and another is one of the directors of education and learning. Patients have also created tools to facilitate research. One of the people who joined the network, the C3N network, is a software engineer who was getting his degree at the MIT Media Lab. He was interested in N of 1 experiments, and he, as part of his dissertation, created a mobile health-enabled N of 1 platform that enables patients like Erin Moore. This is now in use in other diseases. This is a mother of a child with cystic fibrosis, to do experiments with her physician around topics that are of interest. This one is about how to optimize antibiotic use for her child to reduce daily symptoms. Physicians have also been able to use the network. Mike Kappelman is a pediatric gastroenterologist, health services researcher who recently had a large pragmatic trial funded by PCORI. The trial is starting next month, looking at the use of combination therapy for children with Crohn's disease. Much of this work that Jenny described emerged from our work with learning from political and community organizers. We actually work with a firm called 270 Strategies. They're a political organizing firm, and they're teaching us methods of community organizing, how to systematically build large communities. And we can talk about that on the break. So ever since we started Improve Care Now, we've had an ethos of collaboration, of stealing shamelessly. We call it stealing shamelessly and sharing seamlessly. And what as we've learned about what's possible, it's become apparent that participants in the community participate because of the sense of common purpose, because of our normal human desire to contribute and give back, of the sense of mastery that we get, of continuous improvement. There's a sense of camaraderie and solidarity in the network, and hope and respect that really fuels the way we work together. So I just want to close with a few reflections about what we've learned and what we have yet to learn. We've learned that a relentless focus on outcomes and better health is critical. We've learned about the value of designing for synergy. The design process helped us understand how a system could be configured to meet the needs of all the stakeholders simultaneously. We've learned that if we increase the number of participants and create a variety of ways to accumulate and share resources, and if there are structures and processes to make it easier to collaborate, we end up creating a system that allows this sort of cooperative behaviors to emerge. And we also have a lot to learn. We're realizing as we begin to take on new roles, we find ourselves facing the tension of shifting power dynamics that can become uncomfortable as we balance our relationship between patients and clinicians and researchers. This new approach won't take root if patients and clinicians and researchers don't know how to work together, so educating everyone in co-production is going to be a big challenge, and what you all are doing is incredibly important in that regard. And then as the system creates more and more contributions, what we're finding is that our capacity for improvement and innovation and research has to actually be managed carefully, because every week, literally every week, there are new contributions coming from the community, and we literally cannot keep up with all the great ideas and contributions that are taking place. And then perhaps the biggest challenge is learning how to lead in this environment where new behaviors have to emerge. Leadership in our community is much more like gardening than it is like driving a car. It's about creating the conditions so that cooperation and collaboration and new ways of improving healthcare can take place. So we want to close there, and then I want to invite Jenny back up, and we thought we would talk a little bit about, we wanted to invite you into a conversation that we often have. And so one of the things that I've become particularly interested in is what the term patient advocate really means, and what does engagement really mean, because I've struggled over time, and I've learned a lot from Jenny, and so I just wonder if you would talk about sort of your reflections on that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's, I think, a very big difference between being a patient and a patient advocate, and that scale is certainly very fluid. As I described during my section of the talk, when I was young and first diagnosed, was certainly a patient, not a patient advocate. For me, that movement towards being a patient advocate was both taking ownership of my illness, but wanting to make things better. Of all the patient advocates that I've met, both within the IBD world and at large, the reason when you ask, well, why did you get involved in this work, is to make it better for patients that come after us. Everybody wants things to be better. I want the next 12-year-old diagnosed with Crohn's to have an easier time than I did. So in my sense, or in my mind rather, being a patient advocate is not only being involved in things, but having a vision of how healthcare and research should work, so that we're actually moving toward a system where patients are not only at the table, but a big part of the conversation. There's no point in, if we're not there, then our perspectives aren't heard, and then the things that we've learned in our own experiences aren't validated in a sense and aren't integrated into the healthcare system. But I think supporting that patient to advocate transition is something that providers and learning healthcare systems can have a big part in. The idea of not only educating but empowering patients that they can be advocates and hear the actual roles. A lot of us developed our own roles, which is great, and you saw in terms of how we restructured the PAC, how we reimagined what engagement and advocacy looked like, but that was something that we did. And what if we didn't have the encouragement or the empowerment of the network? What would have happened? So I think, at least for myself, it's been both a personal journey in terms of taking ownership and wanting to contribute, but also a journey that was really complemented by the network that gave me both the tools and the platform to be a big advocate.